So good morning, and good morning, guys. Welcome to another fabulous episode of Exit Strategies Radio Show. Hey, I am your host, Cole J. Millette, broker and owner of Exit Realty Low Country Group in beautiful North Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, if this is your first time listening to this show, you, sir or ma'am, are in for a treat because our mission here is very simple. That is to empower our community through financial literacy and real estate education. We're legacy building. That is what we do. And guys, today is no different. As you've been taking this journey with us over all these years, and I'm always amazed at how far we have brought this show, and I am intimidated by the vision that I still yet have for where we're going. We're bringing you the best speakers. We're bringing you people that are in the field. We're bringing you visionaries and thought leaders in legacy building, in real estate investing, and real estate sales, and protecting assets, making your money work for you, all of those things. And I'm super duper excited because we get to continue along that same vein on that road today. All right. So guys, look, I'm not going to steal his thunder. I get to introduce to you today none other than Dr. Axel Meierhoefer. And did I get that right?
Pretty close. Yeah, actually you did.
Awesome. So I'm looking, if you don't mind, I'm going to call you Dr. A, and that's for assets. I love it. So if you don't mind, please introduce yourself and who you are and what it is that you do.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show. So my name is Axel Meierhoefer, like Corbin was just saying. I'm originally from Germany, came over with a military exchange program to the United States. And when I finished my service, I decided to stay since we stayed overall in the military assignment for 6 years here. And, you know, our daughter was very little and it made sense to stay. I got an offer from a company to immediately switch and become an employee and an executive. And then in 2005, I basically started my first business, mainly in the consulting field. And then more recently started Idea Wealth Grower, which is very aligned with what you were just saying. We are trying to help people invest in residential real estate through a mentoring program that basically replicates what I did for myself to build like the time freedom that we now have and enjoy through the portfolio that we develop, and help other people to do the same thing, because I'm just a normal guy, a military officer who thought, okay, how can real estate help me to become financially independent? And it did. And now obviously other people said, hey, I want to do the same thing, but I don't want to make any mistakes. Can you help me? And that's what we do.
We were just checking out your website, and something that kind of really stood out to me in some of the content and stuff that you had is that you are very big on people building legacy. And that's something that, you know, we sometimes, even though we desire it, we overlook it. So I want to touch on kind of a few things, as you're doing a lot of different things to get the word out to people. So again, thank you so much for being on our show today. But what first got you into real estate investing? What was the driver for you?
Well, part of it, it's kind of like a twofold answer I have to give. The number one thing was probably just the sheer fact that as a military officer, you get moved around every 2 or 3 years. And sometimes, and I have to say, when I was still in the German Air Force, they don't have anything like the United States Air Force where there is such a thing like base housing or anything like that. So it was very clear when I was in the German Air Force, every time we got moved, we had to kind of find a place to live. But then even when I came over here to the US side, I was still legally kind of like attached to the German side. And so I wasn't eligible for base housing. And then after I retired anyway, I mean, like every other person in the country, you have to find your own place. But that journey included 11 different places, sometimes for rent, sometimes purchasing. And obviously, when you go through that many different properties, you start looking, you know, like what do other people do? So that's the one part. The other part is I mentioned earlier that I retired from the military around 2002. And anybody who remembers, that was the time where this kind of .com crash happened in the stock market. And for me, when I said, okay, I don't really have a full lifetime ahead of me as my work life anymore. I have maybe another 20 years. That was my thinking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to find a way through my own efforts to build something that can be my retirement income in addition to the military. And if you try to imagine, right when you're trying to think and go through that thought process, the stock market completely crashed. So for me, that meant, oh, I don't want to be in that. I need to find something else. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
the combination of having seen and been in many, many properties and then doing some research revealed to me that most people that were way, way more successful, I'm always quoting Arnold Schwarzenegger as another fellow European immigrant who made millions and millions, 100 times more than I ever made. But when he had to answer that question, he answered it by investing in real estate. And I thought, well, that is probably a good thing to do, research more, and found out, okay, a lot of people, when they have some success or when they really ask themselves, how do I build a legacy? How do I basically build generational wealth? They come to the conclusion real estate is the right place to be. So I then started it for myself. And for the first, like I said, from 2002 to about 2017 or so, I only did it for my family.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's this thing, if you and I would have been friends at the time and we come together and talk a little bit, hey, what are you doing? What am I doing? And I would say, okay, well, I just got myself another property, or I'm waiting to get another property very soon. These conversations led to the point where most of friends and family said, hey, this is really interesting. Could you do this for me? And then the next step was, hey, this is really interesting. I'm pretty sure there are other people out there who would want to do the same thing. Can you maybe? And so that constant nudging, I would probably call it, led me to say, okay, well, I believe now, and this is a little bit telling you about my personality, I would never want to advise or suggest something to other people where I don't really comfortable in two
Mm-hmm.
things, that I think and believe that I'm enough of an expert to do this, and number two, that I have done it myself before.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when I went through this kind of 10 years of gaining experience, then ultimately we created Idea Wealth Grower, created the website, created our podcast and all those kind of things. And we're still a little relatively boutique operation because I really literally like to take people by the hand, at least through the first few investments. So they gain that confidence that no matter where they are financially or where they're coming from, that they can do what I have done as well. And I'm just a normal person, basically.
I appreciate that attitude because, that's something that I share with people as well. I don't believe I'm anything special, but I'm here to help. We're here to engage and help get you further down the road. Now, you guys have a very robust website called the Ideal Wealth Grower. For our listeners, guys, you get the opportunity. I want y'all to go, quote unquote, I say go break the website. Let's go inundate the website with inquiries, guys, to get this information. Again, idealwealthgrower.com, so that you can benefit from that. You have your podcast posted there. So there's episodes there. There's a free giveaway there as well. And I'll let you talk about that. But how did you get started, like with your first property? Like if you could describe that process, but if you don't mind, let's take this a little bit further. Describe the feeling when you accomplished your first acquisition.
The first property was basically out of the very end of my military service. My wife and I had basically a house built for ourselves, and I was responsible for the development of a multinational training center between the German military and the US military, which also meant that about 800 German soldiers would come to a relatively small city in the United States, and they needed housing. And so the builders in the community all got together with the city council. So I was like, as they say in German, as well known as a peacock, because I popped up all over the place for all these meetings in the newspaper, and you wouldn't even believe all the mistakes I made. But to your question on real estate, when I realized, okay, how is this going to work for these German families coming over, I was able to actually get some guarantees for the local builders that the German government would basically guarantee to pay the rent for the duration of the contract that they had with the US military, which was 19 years. And so if you're a builder and you say, okay, I build a house, even if you own it yourself or you sell it to somebody, you can sell in addition a rent guarantee basically by a government. That makes it very juicy. And I had thought everybody and their grandmother would jump on this opportunity, but to my big, big surprise, it was probably so unusual that much fewer people than I thought would do it. And I thought, well, it's kind of going to what I said earlier. At that time already, had the thought, well, maybe I need to be the guinea pig and just show that it can be done. And I basically bought a property like 2 streets over from where we were living. I had the crazy idea that I would be a good property manager, which I was. But that was basically the first thing. And one thing, when you said, touch a little bit on the emotional component, on the feeling, for me, keep in mind that this was before I ever started my first own business. It really gave me this first inkling that my role had changed from kind of like a recipient of orders from the military, or basically a recipient of external input, to really becoming somebody who is now responsible on the one hand, but also with that responsibility being in charge. So my whole view of, okay, even though it's just a house, but it's something that I have and that I can influence, I can determine what to do with it and who is in it and how much it's supposed to cost. And I really got very motivated and excited, even though there are several stories that was in the end, like many other real estate investors will probably tell you or have told you on your show. The first one is typically a struggle and doesn't make a lot of money. And that was true in this case too, but it taught me a lot of lessons. But the emotional thing was, for one, I was proud together with my wife that we were people who had more than one house.
Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind, I mean, most people say the dream is to get a house with a picket fence and stuff, and then you're kind of there. To have another house, that was kind of like, and this little bit first inkling, wow, we are now investors. Now we have kind of like a business, even though we didn't have any name for it or stuff like that. So that was kind of, I guess, the best way I can describe it.
That's interesting, because you went from being a receiver to a giver, or providing that contribution. As you explained that transition, that was my immediate thought, that again, now you're a provider, if you will, of housing and creating opportunities for people versus merely being the person that the opportunities are created for. And that's empowering. I mean, you're able to empower people through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't mind, I mean, you mentioned earlier that on our website, we have this kind of free gift. And obviously, this is also available to your audience. If they just go ideawealthgrower.com/free, they have access to that free gift. And what it is basically, because you just said, when I heard this, something triggered in my mind. For me, this was also, like I just described, a shift in my mindset. And I've seen it so many times over time and in so many discussions that I ultimately thought, okay, now we're kind of jumping like 15 years forward from this first house. I really thought it would be helpful for people to have something that they can go through and do some exercise and stuff. So I created this free gift. It's called a mindset manual. And what it actually identifies is on a spectrum. I created a spectrum that has on one hand victimhood, and on the other hand, the creator of your own future. And so the first part of this mindset manual has a few exercises for anybody who downloads it to go through and say, let me find out, where am I on this spectrum? Am I total victim? Am I total creator, or somewhere in the middle? And then in the second part, it gives you some exercises and suggestions. What could you do if you find yourself anywhere on the spectrum, but you want to get closer, or ideally all the way to the creator of your own future? What can you do? And then the third part is a little story for somebody who discovered for himself not even so much a victim, but that he was doing a job, actually in this case an accounting job, and realized it is not fulfilling anymore. It was exciting and interesting in the beginning, but now it's just super repetitive. I'm not really excited emotionally anymore. And so without taking all the story away, he discovered something else that he really loved to do, and ultimately was brave enough to do it, because that allowed him to create his own future. And with real estate investing, I believe the same thing is true. You should, if you can, get your mind in that space, become the creator of your own future, because that will ultimately lead you to what we call the time freedom point, where you have enough passive income coming in to have the freedom to decide what you want to do with your time, rather than somebody externally, whether it's your boss or whoever else, telling you what you have to do to make enough money so that you can afford your life.
Do you want something more? I mean, more meaningful moments, opportunities, deeper relationships, and memorable experiences. Do you want to make a difference? If you said yes to any of that, a career in real estate could be the opportunity you're looking for. Guiding people through one of the most important decisions they ever make, the purchase or sale of their home could be both rewarding and lucrative for you. Exit Realty's revolutionary compensation model, training, and technology provide you with the tools and resources you need to start and build your successful real estate career. Call Exit Realty Low Country Group today at 843-619-3005. That is 843-619-3005, or visit join.exitlowcountry.com and make your exit today. That is powerful. We have this conversation here on the show. My mind is blown about it. I'm trying to keep everything together over here, rubbing my head.
I'm not talking fast, I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because we talk about this, that in order for you to be successful at what we're talking about, in order for you to be successful as an investor, you have to have the right mindset. People oftentimes, there's people that tell you to start out with the end in mind, and I get it. But some people focus on living the end and don't take the path to get there. So they don't have the right mindset, because the mindset that's requires diligence, commitment, and a number of other adjectives that many people get off the bus on, so to speak, and don't follow through. You're committed to making a difference. You're committed to creating a legacy, financial freedom, or independence for your family and those around you. And now you're sharing the wealth of knowledge that you've gained in that process with others so they can duplicate it.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me saying, I like the analogy. If we look at our own lives, wherever we find ourselves right now, and try to find analogies, then I would say the first one is when you went to school. You were only allowed to graduate when you reached a certain level of mastery. Then you went in whatever kind of profession you went, but you were then again a novice and had to go through a certain process and steps and gaining experience before you could claim that you have reached a certain level of mastery. And that's basically what I do with our clients at Idea Wealth Grower, is to say, I'm not to brag, but when you've done something for 15 years, you have reached a certain level of mastery. And it's always easier when you have somebody like the person who has done it before, who can show you as a novice or apprentice how you can kind of advance the experience and the knowledge to also get to that level of mastery. I think people make it sometimes sound like that process, even though we live through it over and over through our life, somehow doesn't apply to investing. And I want to caution anybody who is listening to us, it does apply pretty much to every frame of life. If you have the goal to master something, you have to be willing to go on the journey, put in the time, learn this stuff. And obviously it goes faster if you have somebody like me who is providing mentoring or other experts. But to assume there is something like instant wealth or instant riches or instant mastery, it just doesn't exist.
And that is an assumption. I'm in this season now where I try to limit social media. I've been on this thing of kind of limiting over a time period. So now I really whittle myself down significantly as to what I expose myself to on social media, because there's a lot of people that essentially are trying to sell a course or sell this or sell that like it's a get rich quick scheme or instant overnight success, when those of us who are out here in the field doing it, we know how much it takes, what the commitment is, and oftentimes it takes a period of time in order to achieve that wealth. Wealth gives us freedom. One of the first things it does is it gives us back time, or gives us time. Doesn't give it back, because you don't spend the time, you spent it. But it creates the opportunity for you to have more time, because most people, which we know, if you go to Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, the four quadrants, most people trade time for money. When money is making you money, then you're able to gain more time. Give us your thoughts on that, as to what freedoms come about when you're successful at real estate investing.
I think the two words, and that's why I don't know if I really coined the term or not, but what we're using as the term in this context is the time freedom point, or time freedom as a term. And what we mean by that is you have basically two options. You can have other people tell you what you're supposed to do during certain times of the day, the week, the month, the year. And because they can tell you that, they compensate you with money. Or for that same amount of 168 hours we all have every week, the more independent you get financially, the more freedom you have to be self-directed when it comes to what do I want to do with these 168 hours. So a lot of people work 40, 50, 60 hours a week of those 168 hours being directed by some other people. And then we also need to sleep some. So most people have less than half really to direct themselves on what they want to do with the time that we all have, which is all the same 168 hours. So financial independence, or financial freedom as we call it, by creating a passive income portfolio in residential real estate, more and more allows you to determine what do I want to do with those 168 hours, and not somebody else telling you. And the legacy part of that is that you and I and anybody who is just starting now has to put in that time to build that portfolio. You massively shorten it for the next generations, because they will already much, much earlier in life have the opportunity to have this freedom to decide how they want to use their 168 hours a week. And it's not for encouraging them to be lazy, but one thing I wish somebody would have told me when I was younger was, you want to do ideally the things that you're really passionate about, and not the things that pay you the most. And that is what financial freedom on a legacy perspective really brings you, is that you can say my children and their children have the true opportunity to first find out what's your passion, and then live your passion, knowing that there will always be enough money coming in, because generations before you have helped you to develop that, so that you can really live the passion. I believe people who do live their passion, for me, one of the biggest examples is Elon Musk. Nobody voluntarily works 100 or 128 hours out of 168 hours a week if you're not passionate about it. And all the other stuff that we hear in the media is, I believe, to a large extent, just envy. The guy is living what he's passionate about, and he can afford it. And even though we're not necessarily need to become billionaires, but when we can get to a point where we have assured income every month from our investments, so we don't have to worry how we pay our bills, then we are in a sense in the same position that we can find out, hey, I always wanted to be a guitar player or an artist or a sculptor or a photographer or whatever. And I know I may never be as good in it that it really pays me the big bucks, but I don't need to, because my passive income out of my investments covers me to really enjoy my life. And if we live our passion, I'm kind of preaching here a little bit, but if we live our passion, life is so much more exciting. Right. And that's ultimately what I find is very motivating for people who get into our mentoring program and work with me, is to say, yes, it's a struggle a little bit while we're doing it and while we're on this journey, financially mainly, but there is a really, really strong purpose and motivation behind it. And that makes us stick to it.
It gives an opportunity to live a life, if you will, by design.
If you look at it on a lifespan, right, nowadays we know that men live about 80 years, women about 90 or so, something like that. And if you look at it from that perspective, and I can tell most people need about 10 years dedicated to developing a passive income portfolio. In a bigger scheme of things, now obviously you would like to do it as early as possible. So if you start at 25, you're done at 35, now you have the remaining 50 years or 55 years to play, right? Mm-hmm. If you start a little later, you might still have 30 years or 40 years to play. So dedicating 10 years or thereabouts to build this legacy portfolio for your generation and then have it basically forever, I think is massively worth it.
That is awesome, because that is really what this thing is about, making sure that you position yourself so that you can sustain in the years when you can't work, when you can't trade the time anymore because you're physically not able. Have you set yourself up to have money still coming in, to be able to take care of yourself, and then you're able to transition that to your family, to your children or heirs, in order for them to get a jump start going forward, and they add to it, and this thing becomes a compound or snowball effect where at some point in time in the future, your family is benefiting from a massive legacy, and all you're doing is continue to add to it. Each generation adds to it. And that is how wealth has been accumulated in our country by people that do this. Next generation, yeah, they may have inherited, but they add to it. So for the next generation.
if people have actually done, anybody that I have met in our programs and even before and around it and outside of it, is anybody who has had like 4 or 5 deals that actually conclude and they actually start performing, there's a certain component of addictiveness to it. So when you say, the next generation is going to add to it, if they see what's already there and how it works, it's a little easier than for you and me and your audience who might be thinking, okay, should I get into this? Should I start this? And if there's no history about it, there is a little bit of a hurdle. But when you have family members who inherit 10 or 15 properties that are performing and paying like $4, $5, $8,000 a month, because the longer the family had them, the more they get paid down and the income that you make from it gets bigger and bigger. It is very, very likely that somebody says, wow, I see this money coming in, maybe I can do something. It's a different dynamic than somebody like you and me who had to start without any history of it. We just had to work on it. But I can tell anybody who is listening, this stuff gets addictive as soon as you have a few successes. And my mentoring clients are always, when they start getting to ramen soup kind of talk, I tell them, hey, you don't have to diet down your life that much just so that you get the money to invest in the next property sooner, right? Like, you should enjoy life too, but that's a little indication, right? Like, if you had a few successful deals, then they start thinking, how can I take more of my money for investing and less for consumption? And it needs to be a good balance. But this kind of aspect of, it's so fun when you see it work, then I'm very optimistic. My daughter, for example, that she will benefit from it when I finally turn it over to her, and her kids, if she ever has any, will probably see it to be, hey, this is really cool. We never have to be worried if we get Social Security or income or have a job or anything like that. We can really do what we love to do.
Thank you so much for today. You have provided some significant insights into real estate investing and establishing, building a legacy. So if you don't mind, how can our listeners get in contact with you? Where can they reach you at for more information? You offer mentoring to prospective real estate investors. Where can people get in contact with you at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it already. The website is idealwealthgrower.com, and mentoring is basically the active component. But what we also do in the same context is everything that I have built, every relationship to providers, insurers, lenders, and so forth is part of that. And our web guy, Elf, basically made it so if you just hang around on the website for 1 or 2 minutes, you get invited to the newsletter, you get invited for a call and so forth. So it's really easy, whichever way you prefer to get in touch with us, as soon as you just go to the website and spend a few minutes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. For our listeners, guys, please go out, please check out idealwealthgrower.com. Reach out to Dr. Meierhoefer and his team, and let's get you started. There's no reason for you to delay. Real estate is an opportunity. Forget what the masses are saying. Forget what media is telling you to believe. Listen to professionals, and moreover, the people who are actually doing it, so that you have a better understanding as to what's going on, and moreover, where your opportunities lie. For our listeners, again, thank you so much for tuning in. Dr. Meierhoefer, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for being part of the Exit Strategy Radio Show family. We humbly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for taking notes and starting your journey, whether it be starting in your mind or taking the initial step beyond that of action towards your dreams, towards creating that legacy for you and your family. Y'all know how I feel. Y'all know what I say, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to say it anyhow, which is I love you, I love you, I love you. And we're going to see you guys out there in those streets.